is Chris Walker. Thanks for being here. Thanks for having me at Creativity Conference. And Mike, Microsoft Garage. I actually have been doing a lot of things with Mike, so it's always fun to come down here. So I'm going to cover creative planning. So before I go into that, has anyone ever heard this phrase before? Okay. So it's something that I've been playing around with. I didn't know if it's like out in the ethos. It's something that came to me recently working with a lot of people, especially my friends that are artists and creative or doing creative projects for companies. So I like this quote. I like to have quotes before things begin. So success is more than luck. It's about planning towards achieving it. My name's Chris Walker. I say I'm a creativepreneur. For me, a creativepreneur is someone who mixes creativity and entrepreneurship. So I think there are a lot of different types of creativepreneurs. You could be, an artist and you want to do your own business. You could be an internal entrepreneur who uses creativity. So you could be an entrepreneur. We've heard a lot about disruptive entrepreneurs, in design thinking. But for me, it's like all those things. And so Mike was saying I should tell a little bit about myself and kind of how I've gotten here. So I was a comic book artist at Marvel in DC for about 10 years. And I tell people, when you think about my experience, it's this kind of pursuit of or being passionate about storytelling and creativity. So I worked for Marvel in DC for about 10 years. I was a colorist. I worked with hip hop. So I worked with Diddy. I worked with I worked on album covers with like KRS-One. I did some stuff with Eminem. And it was all like illustration based and comic book based. I was a writer and producer for a while. So I had like a web series that got featured on MTV Geek and written up in Wired. And then I made my way into advertising. I was a creative director, and then I ended up being a strategy director. And so, again, with that kind of, and I'm also a classically trained painter. I forget all this stuff because I don't think about it, because again, I'm just really pursuing this idea of creativity and storytelling. And so throughout these experiences, I've really kind of come to see like the processes that go into it. So if you have a creative idea, how do you get it from an idea stage to a point where you can articulate it to other people and so that it's actionable? And again, working with a lot of my friends who are creative, that can be challenging. I was recently, even just a couple of projects, talking to some friends who are creative, and they're like, oh, we have these big ideas, but we don't really know how to get people to work on them. And so through that process, I started thinking about this idea. And so creative planning to me, it's more of a strategic framework that helps to bridge this gap between idea and execution and really gives you kind of this roadmap, I say, for success, but you can define success however you want for your creative project. It doesn't have to be business success, but that's part of the process, right? Is defining what success looks like to you. So for me, creative planning equals clarity and creative play. Clarity is that clear idea that you can speak to, that's actionable, that other people can understand, that they can be involved with. And then creative play is not just the process of getting there, but the mindset that you have to have. And raise your hand how many people in the audience do creative projects and work with other people. So you've probably experienced creative play where everybody has an idea and you're kind of in the mix. And I think the heart of creative play is having that openness, that ability to listen to other ideas, like Maxim was saying, like the childlike nature. And I think you have to have creative play to get through the process. So creative planning made easy. I like these kind of 3 steps. They align with a lot of different things. So, if you've ever worked with like a consultancy, it's very similar. If you've ever done agile or lean startup, it's very similar. So this idea of like you have to define the idea or the vision first. There's some ideation and some brainstorming, and then there's evaluation and refinement. So with the defining, it's really just making it clear, right? Like if you're the leader, if you're a product developer, if you're an artist and you have some assistants, if you are the band and you're trying to get the band back together, whatever it is, you have to have this vision and it has to be articulated. Once you get there, everybody has buy-in, they're kind of on the same page, then you're ideating and brainstorming, right? So you have that basic idea, and then you're ideating and you're brainstorming. In product development and design thinking, this is where IDEO has the famous like rapid prototyping, wire testing, MVPs. All these things are necessary so that you can get the idea out quickly, collaborate with others. Again, this is kind of the heart of the creative play, right? You're playing with ideas together and you're sharing. And then you're doing evaluation and refinement, right? So once you've kind of played with these ideas, you're brainstorming, you're really kind of testing the feasibility. Feasibility is something I learned from IDEO. So if you're working on something, is it feasible, right? Not only is it desirable, so there's three rings: desirability, feasibility, and viability. You know, creative people, we live in desirability all the time, right? It's like, oh, this is cool, or this is dope, or I love this. And then you get to feasibility and you're kind of like, oh, maybe I can do this. And I think that's where a lot of creativity can come in for us. And then there's viability, right? Like, who's going to buy this thing? Or, you know, it's not always about buying. Again, if you're deciding what success is, maybe it's just people liking it or people coming to your event. But whatever those things are, you're going through that process. And then, you know, prototyping, testing, feedback. So even let's say like you want to throw an event, you're like, hey, I have this idea for an event. You talk to some people, you kind of brainstorm it, you talk about it a little bit more, you write down some ideas, maybe you make some art, and then you talk about it, you test it with some people, you discover whether or not you can do it. You're like, oh, it's going to cost X amount of money. And then you try to make your event. Again, it's just kind of, you know, these kind of 3 steps over and over again. They don't always have to be super linear. Sometimes they're very circular, you know, but that's all part of the process. So thinking about the mindset of creative planning. So articulate the idea. I think it's really essential to articulate the vision before you start. How many of us have kind of been through this where you have an idea, or you haven't really articulated it, but you have some friends that you want to do it with, and then maybe like halfway through, everybody's kind of like, well, what are we doing? You know? That's this step, right? Or not this step, this kind of, again, what did I say before? The mindset, right? Like, you have to articulate the idea. And the great thing about articulating the idea, it doesn't always have to be the person who kind of has the germ or the seed. You know, like, you can kind of vibe and work together. But at some point, you have to have some sort of articulation so everybody is kind of in the same place with it. And even if it's not 100%, I had a strategy director. I worked on McDonald's for about 3 years, which was a lot of fun. And our head of strategy said, you know, when we're doing strategy, it can be directional or it can be pinpoint. And a lot of times you want things to be directional because as you do the work, you kind of narrow it in. It's hard to do that unless you articulate the idea, which kind of gets you moving in this general direction. Again, doing so allows you to have feedback, you build consensus, you align expectations. And again, if you've ever worked with other people, you know, this is like one of those things. So I think I talked through some of this. So it gives you clarity of vision. It helps you define the desired outcome so that you can have clear direction later. It allows you to establish specific goals and objectives to guide the process. And again, all these things can change, right? That's the one thing I loved about learning design thinking. You know, again, it's directional to pinpoint. One of the things they talk about is, I'm trying to think, how do they phrase it? There's convergent and divergent thinking. So with divergent thinking, you're just putting ideas out, and then convergent thinking, you're kind of narrowing that funnel. This happens through the whole process, right? And so it's never really kind of bad or good. It's just part of the process, unless you're kind of going way back up at the top and you're rethinking the articulation of the vision, which is okay too, but you have to then acknowledge like, hey, we're rethinking the vision. So that's like a full break stop versus like, hey, there's this one part that we don't agree with. Let's talk about that. But again, these steps kind of help you to do that. And then, you know, a well-defined vision sets the foundation for successful execution. And even like I said, that's okay, even if you rethink the vision, because if you go back, then you will have the successful execution that you want later. So fostering a creative mindset, I think this is really important because as you could see, even just through that articulation of the vision, there's creativity that happens, right? One thing I learned working in strategy, even the way that you talk about something or the way that you express it or the way that you say you have an insight, it helps someone see the idea. So, but that also fosters creativity. When I was working in strategy, I tend to like very kind of open things and kind of work with people through them through more kind of collaboration and conversation. Some strategists are very specific, right? And they'll have a really tight insight and a really tight idea, and the way that they're articulating it is literally to get you to the place that they are. I don't think either one is wrong or right, but it helps to foster that creativity. For me, creativity in that instance is more like, hey, let's have a jam session, let's sit and talk, let's some whiteboard. For that other way, it's more like, hey, I kind of have an idea of what this is, but I want to get you there quickly so that we can then ideate around that. So again, creative play is really important here. It encourages this mindset. It gives you the ability to embrace ideas and experiment with them. I mean, I'm always like, you either know it the first time you're working on it or probably like the 15th or 20th time. In my experience, it's not that much where it's in between, but it gives you the ability to have that open-mindedness. And then playfulness, it stimulates innovative thinking, and it helps you to break through limitations. So if you're working on a creative project and you're feeling a little stressed out, we were talking about this before, Maxim was talking about this, take a walk, do something else, take a break from it. If you have that playful mindset, you start to be able to see things in different ways, and that's like really the most important thing, is to be able to look at things, compare them, see them, and then experiment with them. And so the activities that I think are really important, having that articulated vision, then you can measure it. And again, I'm not like anything is right or wrong until you really, really get to the point where you know what you want or what you're doing, as long as you keep that open-mindedness. But being able to measure the vision, right? So if you're going through the creative planning process, you're thinking through those 3 steps, that vision has been articulated, you can always go back and measure against that vision. And measurement depends on the project, right? It could be very official in KPIs, and it can move the business needle. It could be creative expression. I really want to express things this way and make people feel this way. But you have to be able to measure against that vision to know that you're kind of moving to the place that you want to. And again, if you halfway through find out like, hey, I'm not into that, or that vision isn't what I want, that's okay too, but you have the tools to be able to do so. So thinking with that, you want to keep the overarching vision in mind while making decisions throughout this process. It's about balancing creative exploration with innovation and strategic alignment. A fussy way to say like, hey, here's what I want to do and here's realistic constraints. I think a lot of times with creative people, we have really, really amazing big ideas, and then we're like, oh, okay, like, how do I do it? I think one of the best things I read about independent filmmaking was a book that said, all right, as an independent filmmaker, one of the easiest ways to think about making a film is to say, what things do I have? All right, well, I have an apartment and my roommate's not going to be there for 3 hours, right? I have, an old video recorder which can make cool images, and we have a cat, and you write a script around that, right? But those are constraints. But also, as you know, if you're creative and if you're not, here's a little thing that we know, but we don't tell everybody. You actually need a box for creativity to be in, because it's breaking the box where you're the most creative. So you're just making a little box for yourself. And then you want to ensure that each step contributes to the overall vision, right? So as you're thinking through it, you're going back and looking at it. And again, you're regularly evaluating the progress so that you can adjust. I always joke with people when I'm in the agency world that as a strategist or a planner, I'm kind of like a West Coast surfer. I'm like very wavy. I'm like, yeah, dude, like we're just in the ocean. We'll figure it out. The wave will come along. So that's just kind of how I think about things. Other people are not like that. So discovering your throughputs, I think this is really important. I use throughputs a little bit differently here. It is the paths that you're going to get there. So if your measured vision is where you're going, these are the ways that you're getting there, right? And so you're going back and you're looking at your vision and you're saying, okay, this seems cool. Here's some different ideas. Here are ways that I could get there. Are they realistic? And then you're starting to look at those throughputs, right? And if that throughput is more difficult than you imagine, or it's harder to do, then you have to take a step back and say like, okay, is that going to work? Or is a throughput taking you to the wrong place, right? Like you could have a throughput that you're like, oh, this is a great process or technique, or Creative people, I could do these 20 things right now, and it's like, well, you just need to be doing that one thing to actually move that one piece of the project forward. So it's really kind of thinking through, discovering these throughputs as you go through the project. So this helps you to prototype ideas and gain insights. Again, this is where you're really kind of doing some of that brainstorming and experimenting. You're collecting feedback so you can inform these iterations. Feedback can be great and feedback can be painful, but you have to be open to it. You're refining concepts to align with resources and constraints. Again, like, hey, that's great. I've got, my roommate's gone. I've got my apartment. I've got this old school camera and I've got this cat. Well, the cat's being really fussy right now, so we're going to put the cat in the closet and my roommate's going to be back in an hour. So maybe we're not making the greatest feature in the world. Maybe we're making a 6-minute short. But again, it's just this kind of process that you're going through over and over again. And then just being iterative, it helps you understand things. It creates better chances of success, and it minimizes risk. And I think this is really important for creative people, because I think a lot of times we're very bold in our decisions, and sometimes maybe we are, I won't say too bold, but maybe we're not thinking through everything. The classic thing a project manager or producer will tell you, it's like, how long do you think it'll take? Okay, it'll take twice that long. I say if you're doing something in business, 3 times as long, because you got to factor in meetings, clients, that sort of thing. And then collaboration is key. You have to foster the sense of collaboration and teamwork among stakeholders and team members. You really do want to have those diverse perspectives, and you want people to actively participate. It just allows you to see things in a lot of different ways, see those throughputs, have those kind of conversations about the vision, and it allows you to move forward. So, there's a lot of synergy, there's collective intelligence, right? And then sometimes you also have to be aware of groupthink, right? Groupthink isn't great, collective intelligence is. Create an inclusive environment so that, everyone feels equal. They feel like their opinions matter. If you're the team leader or the project leader or the creative leader, you still want people to be felt like they're being heard and listened to, even if you're like calling the shots, And even at the beginning of the project, if you're like, hey, I'm going to listen to everybody, but when it's time to make decisions, let me have that moment where I can make the decision for the team. One of the best things I heard about filmmaking as a director is to tell everyone, like, hey, as a director, I'm willing to listen to your ideas, but also when it's time to make a decision, you have to respect the fact that I'm moving forward. And if we can't have that back and forth, then as a director, we don't get to have that engagement. Another funny thing that I heard from a creative director is actually ECD, talking about working on things together. And so in the agency world, there's often this tension between strategists, accounts, and the creative team on who owns an idea, who can do certain things. Great ideas can come from anywhere, but the ECD was like, that's great. And if you pitch a great idea, you also have to live with it. So the same way the creative team is going to be up working at 3, 4 o'clock in the morning on different iterations and having client feedback, you have to be right there living with your great idea too. So I thought that was funny. And then collaboration, it just enhances creativity and problem solving and innovation. And so at the end of the day, the goal is clarity. And so, you really want to have this clarity for your creative endeavor. You want to be able to define these desired outcomes. It helps you to set goals. You want to be able to establish this clear roadmap, right? So if you're thinking about that kind of articulation, that ideation, that kind of execution, it kind of gives you, a little bit of a roadmap. There's places where people can have feedback, where you can evaluate, and at the end of the day, you really want to get through these challenges that come with any creative project, because the reality is you don't know the things until you work on them. I had a boss who told me, part of doing the work is a forcing function. So you make a decision so it gets you to the next decision so that you can make the next decision. And I think that helps you to overcome procrastination. But whenever you have creative play and you bring it into the work and you know that you're making a creative project and you have these steps and you can give them to other people and talk through them, then it helps you to bring your creative vision to life. So, and I figure I'd talk really fast and get through it so I can answer any questions or have a conversation. We can talk about projects that you've worked on, any of that stuff. Yeah.
Questions for Chris?
Hi, hello to everyone. As a full-time creative, how do you go about not monetizing every single creative idea or project that you have?
That's a great question. I think it depends on what you want to do with your creativity, right? Like sometimes I'll meet people or kind of students or young people, and I'm like, you don't have to make a living for your creativity, right? Like you can go and have another job and you can save that and have it on the side. I think to answer your question more directly, I think about it like Martin Scorsese. So he's like, you make one for the studio, you make one for yourself. So I think there's always, that space to have the work that you want to do. I also encourage people to get involved with projects or work for companies, just so that you can see what things are like at scale or a bigger way, and then you can always bring that back to your own work.
Yes.
Thanks for sharing. And in your talk, you mentioned about diversion and conversion. I would like to know, in your day-to-day job, how do you manage these two metrics and kind of negotiate with a lot of stakeholders in your team? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's how you set up the process, right? So, in the agency world, you'll get a brief, and then from the brief, you'll do an ideation session, and then from that session, you'll turn in kind of like what you want your idea to be, and then it'll be reviewed. So I think, to kind of manage it, I think that divergent part is a lot of brainstorms or those sort of things. And then it's about taking that information, bucketing it, or having some sort of way that you cull it so that you can then decide what moves forward and what doesn't. Some people call it stage gating. But I think that's the way that you manage it. And then that kind of articulation of the vision is really important, because that's how you can look at the divergent ideas to figure out what moves forward. And sometimes something will come along that's like so powerful, you're like, hey, let me rethink, the vision itself.
I kind of have a corollary question to that. So when you're working with teams and you're doing the idea dumping, are there ways that you frame the conversation so that people understand and manage their expectations and to manage their disappointment, that not all ideas will be used and some ideas will be jumping story points for other ideas? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah. I think it's all how you set up the project, right? So I think one of the great things I saw from IDEO is, you say like, this is a rapid fire ideation, right? So just this idea of like, we're gonna get as many ideas out as possible. There's not an owner, right? There's not an editor. It's just about getting ideas out. And I think that's part of where the creative play and the collaboration comes in, where you tell the group like, hey, we're working together on this as a group. I think if someone has an idea that they really wanna own or they wanna do, I think you can encourage it. If it's to the point where they're like, hey, I think this has to be the project, I think you have a conversation with them. If they're not like the team lead or the project lead or the creative lead, it can be challenging. But I think, if you set things up so that there's transparency and open conversation, things move forward. I think whenever you're getting people together for a team, everybody, again, with the vision articulation, that's part of it. Are we here for the same vision, right? Like if you're here for your creative idea to move forward, that's okay, but is that the vision? And if your vision is like, hey, I need a creative idea to move forward, let's have that conversation. Maybe this project isn't the project for that, but I can support you on that.
Okay. Have time for a couple more. Anybody? Yeah.
I got here late, but hey, I'm not the least creative person, but I work on knowledge management, and I was really interested about collective intelligence because I'm doing a lot of research on that. How do you make people come together and understand systems complexity when, especially in interdisciplinary research, people come there with different notions and ideas and even jargons, and that's the biggest problem I have. How do you bring them together so that they can talk at the same level at least?
Yeah, I think it's similar to the question that was just asked, right? It's just like the spirit of the project. And I know sometimes it can be it's challenging both in creative worlds and business worlds, right? Like in business worlds, there's like a team lead or somebody who has ownership. Sometimes in creative worlds, people can, have a very strong voice, right? And they can lead by personality. So I think it's how you set things up. So again, for yourself, it might be saying, hey, we're going to set this up. Here's the knowledge information system or knowledge management system that I want to have. We're looking at it from these different perspectives. But essentially, we have to align from this perspective. So if you think about it, it goes back to vision articulation, because you have a vision for information management and how it needs to be done. You have people who are collaborating with you who either want to work with you or have been assigned to work with you. Everyone needs to have that shared vision. So maybe in your instance, it might be more vision articulation work, and you might have to spend more time with that group so that, sometimes people need a shared vision that they've helped to contribute to, and kind of management trick. It might still be your vision, but people have to work through it and be part of it to say, hey, I contributed to that. And so once people do that, you might then have people who will be captains for you and then help their team and say, no, this is the vision that we created. That's why I think the vision articulation and measurement of that vision is so important. And one of the tricks that you can do is to say like, hey, can we build this vision articulation or this vision statement together?
All right, hey, I'm going to take the last question if you don't mind. So I know that Chris is super passionate, very talented comic artist. So when you were working you kind of breezed over this, when you were working at Marvel in DC on comic books, what's the most creative thing you worked on that never saw the light of day that you can talk about?
I don't know if anything never saw the light of day.
Tell us something that maybe you absolutely loved working on.
So I worked with an artist named Rob Haynes, who was like a big creative hero of mine. He was like one of the first people to bring very simplified drawing styles to comics, or at least currently. And we were both really big into anime and manga, and I got to work with him on a Hulk project. And so to get super nerdy about colors, when an artist doesn't do what's called spot blacks, where they fill in the shadows and they just do the line art, as a colorist you get to have more say so. And so I got to really bring a lot of color theory and things from art school, but then the way that he was drawing was really abstract. So I'm a big color theory, color field painter, like Rothko and all that. So, and then I was able to combine that with a lot of pop art. So the book is just this really intense, very jagged piece of work, and all my color theory was super saturated, and for a while I got into where the camera would point, because where the camera points, colors change and exposure changes. So it was very pushing the boundaries of stuff, and people would look at it and be like, dude, I have no idea what you're up to on this. And I was like, that's all right. So that's probably one of my favorite books.
That's great. Hey, thank you, Chris Walker.